Is this supposed to be a joke? The voice, sharp and dripping with the arrogance of an officer fresh out of the academy, cut through the thick, stifling air of the engine room. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, jaw clenched, the crisp white of his uniform already marked by faint streaks of sweat, glared from behind a wall of silent monitors. His words were directed at the man standing calmly beside the main turbine, a man whose very presence felt like an insult to everything Thorne represented. The stranger was old, likely in his 70s, with hands blackened by decades of labor and the unmistakable stains of oil and grease. He wore plain navy blue overalls, an almost jarring contrast to the spotless uniforms of the dozen engineers standing nearby. They watched the exchange with uneasy fascination, some smirking behind their composure, others tense with frustration. The man's name was James Jim Vance, though to most of them it meant nothing. He stood quietly, his focus not on the indignant officer before him, but on the massive, motionless turbine dominating the room. His stillness carried a strange kind of authority, a calm presence amid the rising tide of panic. For 48 grueling hours, the USS Vigilance, one of the Navy's most advanced aircraft carriers, had been dead in the water. A catastrophic failure in the main propulsion system had silenced its engines, leaving the colossal ship adrift in the endless Pacific. Elite engineers had been flown in, diagnostics run again and again, every protocol executed to perfection. Still, nothing worked. The floating city of 5,000 crew members and billions of dollars in machinery was now little more than a powerless shell. As the ship's chief engineer, Thorne bore the full weight of that failure. He was a man of data and precision, top of his class, fluent in simulations, equations, and cutting-edge systems. He could calculate thermal efficiency in his sleep and explain nuclear propulsion theory better than anyone aboard. But theory couldn't bring the engines back to life. And now standing before him was this relic from another era. "I asked you a question," Thorne snapped, his patience breaking as he descended from the control platform. The heavy clang of his polished boots against the metal catwalk rang through the tense silence. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "And what are you doing in my engine room?" Jim Vance didn't move. He simply listened to the silence, to the faint metallic groans of an overworked cooling system, to the low hum of the emergency diesel generators that could never match the thunder of the ship's main engines. Around him, the younger engineers exchanged uneasy smirks, amused by their superiors' rising frustration. "He's with me," came a gruff voice from the hatchway. Rear Admiral Pike stepped into the room, his face set in grim lines. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes told a different story, tired, burdened, and resolute. He had made the call, a call that had been met with disbelief and quiet ridicule across the fleet. A call to bring in a retired Master Chief Petty Officer who'd long ago disappeared into a quiet life on the coast of Maine. Lieutenant Commander Thorne straightened immediately, his irritation giving way to a stiff, formal stance. "Admiral, with all due respect, this is a restricted area," he said, his voice edged with control. "We're facing a critical failure on a nuclear-powered carrier. The Navy's best engineers are already on it. This isn't the time for visitors." His gaze flicked dismissively toward the old man in overalls. Pike's expression hardened. "The best engineers in the fleet have had 48 hours, he said flatly. "And the Vigilance is still a dead ship. Master Chief Vance is here at my request." "Master Chief?" Thorne repeated, the title catching in his throat. "An enlisted man?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Admiral, with respect, his service records must be ancient. The technology's changed. We're working with integrated digital systems, not steam valves and analog gauges." "And yet," Pike cut him off sharply, his tone low and dangerous, "the systems you're so proud of haven't fixed a thing." The rebuke hung heavy in the air. The smirks vanished from the faces of the junior engineers, replaced by focused silence. Thorne flushed crimson, the sting of humiliation cutting deep, not only from his superior's words, but from the quiet, unbothered presence of the old man who still hadn't turned to acknowledge him. Finally, Vance moved. He stepped forward and ran a weathered hand along a thick conduit, his touch gentle, almost reverent. It was the motion of an artist studying his instrument, not a technician inspecting equipment. His eyes traveled slowly over the maze of pipes, gauges, and valves, seeing not parts, but relationships, patterns invisible to everyone else. He stopped, eyes settling on a small auxiliary valve tucked behind a coolant line. To modern diagnostics, it was irrelevant, barely a blip on a tablet screen. But to Vance, it was speaking. From his pocket, he drew a simple, battered machinist's stethoscope, its metal dulled, its rubber tubing cracked with age. The younger engineers exchanged quiet snickers. The sight was absurd, a relic using relics. Thorne folded his arms, contempt written across his face. He was allowing this charade only because the Admiral was watching. The moment Pike left, he'd have Vance escorted out under security. But then something shifted in Vance's expression. His brow furrowed slightly, his eyes sharpened. A sound, a faint vibration, wrong and discordant, echoed through the metal beneath his hand. A memory stirred. The roar of an engine room decades ago, a storm raging over the North Atlantic, alarms wailing, the smell of ozone thick in the air. He'd been a younger man then, a master chief with a stethoscope pressed to a line just like this one, hearing a similar hum moments before a steam fracture could have killed half his crew. He remembered that sound, the hum of a ghost in the machine. And now he was hearing it again. The engine room of the Vigilance was silent but heavy with tension. Admiral Pike watched closely, hope and worry mingled in his eyes. Thorne stood rigid, his impatience burning. Among the crew, a young petty officer named Chen observed the entire scene from her post near the comm station. At first, she'd been skeptical, amused even. But as she watched Vance move, how he touched the ship, how he listened, her doubt faded. This wasn't confusion. It was understanding on a level none of them possessed. She also saw Thorne's disdain, his pride blinding him. And she'd heard the whispers about Vance. The engine whisperer, they called him, a legend from the old Navy. Realizing the situation was collapsing, Chen's fingers flew over her keyboard. She typed a secure message, not to the bridge, not to her division, but directly to the Fleet Admiral's aide. Priority message: Admiral Pike has brought a civilian consultant aboard the Vigilance to assist with the engine failure. Name: James Vance. LCDR Thorne is obstructing. Situation critical. Crew morale deteriorating. She hit send just as Thorne lost his patience entirely. Admiral, this has gone on long enough, Thorne snapped. We have procedures. I must insist this. Gentlemen, be removed so my team can get back to work. He turned toward the security detail. Escort him to the brig. The guards hesitated, glancing between their superior officers. Pike's face darkened. Commander, you are way out of line, the Admiral said icily. Am I, sir? Thorne shot back, his arrogance now tipping into outright defiance. At that same moment, thousands of miles away at Naval Base Coronado, Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne sat in a secure conference with the Joint Chiefs when a message appeared on his tablet. His aide placed it quietly in front of him. The Admiral's eyes narrowed as he read the name, James Vance. The room fell silent as he raised a hand. Gentlemen, he said calmly, I have an urgent matter to address. We'll reconvene at 1600. He ended the call, turned to his aide, and said with controlled urgency, Get me Admiral Pike aboard the Vigilance. Secure channel. Then patch me through to the Secretary of the Navy. Inform them I'm initiating a personal command intervention. The aide froze, stunned. That protocol was almost never invoked. It stripped all layers of command, placing the Fleet Admiral in direct operational control. Sir, the matter on the Vigilance now involves Master Chief James Vance, the Admiral interrupted sharply. Do you have any idea who that is? The aide shook his head. No, sir. His records are classified. Marcus Thorne stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the room. He's the man who built those engines, he said quietly. Not the manual, Lieutenant, the real design, the one written in sweat and instinct. He's the reason our carriers are still afloat. As his aide scrambled to obey, the Admiral stared out the window toward the Pacific. He remembered another ship, another crisis, a younger version of himself watching Vance save hundreds of lives with nothing but a wrench and his uncanny understanding of the machinery's soul. The thought of a pompous, by-the-book officer, one who, by bitter irony, shared his last name, dismissing that man ignited something deep in him. This was no longer just about a malfunctioning ship. It was about respect. It was about honor. And the reckoning was coming. Am I the only one here trying to uphold military discipline and follow proper procedure? Thorne's voice rang out, tight with anger. This ship is my responsibility, and I will not allow it to be compromised by some... Before Admiral Pike could answer, before the guards could even move, the main communication speaker in the engine room crackled to life. The signal overrode all local controls. The voice that filled the space wasn't the captain's, nor the executive officers. It was a voice every sailor aboard recognized instantly, from Admiral Pike down to the youngest seaman. It was the voice of authority itself. This is Fleet Admiral Thorne. Who is in command in that engine room? A wave of stunned silence swept through the compartment. Lieutenant Commander Thorne froze mid-breath, his face draining of color. A cold dread settled over him, heavier than the silence of the dead engines. He had just publicly threatened a man, in front of witnesses, and now the highest-ranking officer in the entire U.S. Navy was demanding answers. Admiral Pike was the first to regain his composure. "Admiral Pike here, sir," he said crisply. "Pike," the voice acknowledged, sharp and controlled. "Report, why is Master Chief Vance being threatened with arrest?" The deliberate emphasis on Master Chief cut like a blade. It was respect. Respect Thorne had pointedly denied. Thorne's knees went weak. The fleet admiral knew the old man's name and his rank. Pike chose his words carefully. "We have a difference of opinion on procedure, Admiral." "I see," came the icy reply. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne." Thorne swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sir, is it true the main engine has been offline for 48 hours? Sir, we've encountered unforeseen technical challenges. Is it also true," the Admiral's voice cut through him like a laser, "that you dismissed the counsel of one of the most experienced propulsion specialists in the United States Navy? A man I personally credit with saving over 200 sailors aboard the USS Kensington?" The room froze. Every engineer turned to look at Jim Vance, the quiet old man in the greasy overalls, now in a completely different light. The legend was real. "Sir," Thorne stammered, I wasn't aware." "That," the fleet admiral interrupted, "is precisely the problem, Commander. You were not aware. You were arrogant. You let pride and blind faith in your digital readouts blind you to the wisdom standing right in front of you. You are hereby relieved of duty as chief engineer. Report to your quarters and await further orders. Admiral Pike, give Master Chief Vance whatever he requires." And I do mean whatever. The line went dead. Silence filled the room again, heavier, deeper, final. Lieutenant Commander Thorne stood pale and trembling, his authority stripped away, humiliation burning in his chest. Without a word, he turned and walked out, leaving behind his career, his pride, and a lesson that would haunt him for years. Within minutes, the thrum of helicopters echoed overhead. They weren't carrying more engineers or tools. They carried the fleet admiral's personal staff, investigators, and a public affairs team. The message was clear. This was no longer just a repair. It was a reckoning. Aboard the Vigilance, the atmosphere shifted completely. The smirks and whispers vanished. The engineers now watched Jim Vance in reverent silence. He wasn't just an old man anymore. He was a living legend. Unbothered by the chaos, Jim turned back to his work. He handed his old machinist's stethoscope to Petty Officer Chen, the young sailor who had sent the message that changed everything. "Here," he said softly. "Listen. Tell me what you hear." Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the stethoscope against the auxiliary valve he'd pointed out. At first, only the low murmur of coolant. Then something else. A faint, irregular tremor. "There's a vibration," she whispered. "It's not steady." Jim nodded. "A harmonic resonance. That valve isn't sealing completely. Steam's leaking into the secondary coolant line, too little to register on the pressure gauges, but enough to throw the turbine's balance off. The system's reading a failure that isn't real." Then, in calm, measured tones, he began giving instructions, quiet, precise, confident. No shouting, no panic. Just authority born from knowing. He directed the team to manually override the digital controls, to tighten the valve by exactly a quarter turn, a task requiring brute force and absolute precision. By the time the first helicopter touched down, the valve was sealed. A two-star Admiral from Fleet Command stepped off with a Marine honor guard and made straight for the engine room. He arrived just as Jim wiped his hands on a rag and nodded to Petty Officer Chen. "All right, young lady," he said. "Let's bring her back to life. Start the sequence, slow and steady." Chen's fingers hovered over the console. She looked once at Jim, then began. For a moment, silence, then a hum. Low, rising, powerful. The vibration rolled through the deck plates, building into the familiar thunder of life returning. The lights flickered once, then steadied. One by one, the diagnostic screens flashed from red to amber to solid green. The vigilance was alive again. Cheers erupted, but they were cut short as the two-star Admiral entered, saluted sharply, and faced Jim Vance. "Master Chief Petty Officer James Vance," he declared, voice ringing with formality. "By order of the Fleet Admiral, you are recognized for your extraordinary service and lifetime contributions to the United States Navy." He read aloud a citation, detailing the Navy Cross for the Kensington reactor incident, the medals, the innovations that still saved ships today. The young engineers listened, humbled and silent. When it was done, the Admiral turned to the disgraced lieutenant commander, who had been summoned to witness. "Let this be a lesson," he said coldly. "Rank and credentials do not equal wisdom. Technology is a tool, not a replacement for intuition and experience. You forgot that and you dismissed a hero. Our Navy stands on the shoulders of giants like Master Chief. Vance, do not forget it again." Then he turned back to Jim. "The Fleet Admiral sends his personal regards and his apologies for how you were treated." Jim gave a quiet nod, his eyes soft. "The ship's fine," he said gently. "That's what matters. The machine just needed someone to listen. Sometimes people do too." He glanced at Petty Officer Chen, tears in her eyes, pride on her face. And as the hum of the engines filled the air, another memory flickered in Jim's mind. A younger officer years ago asking how he always knew what to do. Jim had handed him this same stethoscope and said, "This doesn't just let you hear the engine, it makes you quiet. It teaches you to listen. The truth hides in the smallest sounds." That officer had become Fleet Admiral Thorne. In the days that followed, the Navy's apology was swift and public. Thorne's career effectively ended, while a new directive spread across the fleet. The Vance Protocol, a requirement that every engineering officer learn the old systems and study the lessons solved by intuition, not algorithms. A week later, on a quiet San Diego street, Thorne jogged past a small garden where an old man was tending roses. He stopped. "Master Chief," he said softly. Jim looked up, calm and kind. "Commander, I wanted to apologize," Thorne said, voice breaking. "I was arrogant. I was wrong." Jim smiled faintly. "You were doing your job," he said. "You just forgot to listen." He clipped a perfect white rose and handed it across the fence. "Even the most complex machines are just simple parts working together. You just have to find the one that's out of tune." Thorne took the rose, eyes wet with understanding. It wasn't about machines or men. It was about humility, about learning to listen. And for the first time, he truly did. Thank you for watching Veterans Valor Stories. If this tale of quiet heroism and earned respect inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories honoring the brave men and women who have served.